Okay, now we're going to start putting things together on the unit circle. You see here the XY axis with the origin point, and since this is the unit circle, that point is 1 on the x-axis and 0 on the y-axis because you haven't moved up any. This point right here is 0 on the x and 1 on the y. This point here is negative 1 on the x and 0 vertically on the y. And this point here is 0 on the x and negative 1 on the y. So there are our 4 main points, starting points on the unit circle. Now we know that the radius is 1. So the unit circle by definition has radius equal 1 and 1 unit. It could be inches, feet, meters, whatever you want. Now what else do we know from this? This first point right here is actually 0 degrees. This point here, that's our 90 degree. That's the x and the y. Come all the way around the circle. This would be 180 degrees. This would be 270 degrees. And then come back to the same point that started out as 0 is now 360 degrees. All right, what else do we know? We also know that all the way around the circle, if we were to go start and move all the way around the circle, it's 2 pi radians, and since it's the unit circle, the radius is 1, so it's just 2 pi is that distance. At 180 degrees, we know that it's pi radians because it's halfway around, 2 pi all the way around. And then at 90 degrees, it's going to be 1/2 pi, or pi over 2. And down here, it will be 3 pi over 2, which is the same as 1.5 pi. Each one of these is half a pi. So 90 degrees here is 1/2 pi around. That's the radians. Another 1/2 pi around, making it pi. Another 1/2 pi around, making it 1.5 pi. And then finally, another 1/2 pi around, making it 2 pi. Now let's find some other information that's going to be useful here. What about halfway through one of these quadrants? That would be 45 degrees. And can you figure out what the radians would be? Well, if it's 0 here on the x-axis and it's pi over 2 is all the way up here and we're 1/2, it would be, we're 1/2 the distance between those two. It would be pi over 2 multiplied by 1/2 because it's 1/2 the distance, which is just pi over 4. Now we don't know the coordinates for that yet. We're going to figure that out, but first let's figure out more of these radian. Remember, that is a 45-degree angle is pi over 4 radians. That's actually the description of the angle. Instead of 45 degrees, you can call it pi over 4. All right, let's put some other common ones in here. There's this angle and this angle, and you probably know what those are going to be. This would be 30 degrees, and this one is going to be 60 degrees. So now we have 30, 45, 60, and 90 degrees. Now let's see if you can figure out the radians for each of these. this distance from this point to the x-axis is 1/3 of the full distance, and the full distance is pi over 2. So we have pi over 2 times 1/3 equals pi over 6, and that is the radian measure for a 30-degree angle is pi over 6. And at 60 degrees, now you know that that's 2/3 of the distance, and you started off with this full quadrant distance being pi over 2, and 60 degrees is 2/3 of the way around that distance. So we end up with 2 pi over 3, or just 1/3 pi. That is the radian measure for a 60-degree angle. So now we've filled in this side, this quadrant, for the unit circle. Pi over 6 is a 30-degree angle. Pi over 4 is a 45-degree angle. Pi over 3 is a 60-degree angle. Pi over 2 is the 90-degree angle. And we just keep going around the circle this same way. We have the middle one, so that's another 45 degrees down. So that's going to be 135. This is 135 degrees. And the next one would be 120. And this one is another 15 degrees down, would be 150. So now let's see if you can figure out what the radians would be. We know that a 60-degree angle is 1/3 pi. Well, there are 3 60-degree angles in this larger 180. So it would be 60, and then here is the 120 right here. So it's another iteration of pi over 3. It would be 2 pi over 3, or 2/3 of the pi. We're 2/3 of the way around to pi right here at 180 degrees. All right, now we're at 135, which we have our first unit of 45, another unit of 45, and now another unit of 45. So these are in half pi's. It was pi over 4 for this, pi over 2 for this. So what will this be right here? This will be 3/4 of pi. So now we've made this, like I said, one quarter was that 45 degree, another quarter, and then when we go that final quarter, we'll be back to pi. And now we're back to iterations of the 60 or 30 degree angle. And this was pi over 6 was one of those 30 degree angles. Another 30 degree angle was 2 pi over 6. Another 30 degree angle would be 3 pi over 6. Another 30 degree angle would be 4 pi over 6. And another 30 degree angle would be 5 pi over 6. I'm just going to fill these in. I think you can see how this goes, but you really need to become very conversant with this unit circle. Okay, I just filled in the rest of this, and you don't necessarily have to memorize exactly each of these segments. And by the way, every single angle has a radian measured. We're just using the ones based off of 90 degrees, 60 degrees, 30 degrees, and 45 degrees, and repeating that as we go around the circle. But you do need to know how you derive these, so that if you had to in a pinch, you could fill this in either completely or enough to answer a question. And just real quickly, you should be able to see, for example, over here on the 330 degree mark, that's 11 pi over 6, all we've done is divided it into chunks of 12, because 2 pi is the same as 12 over 6 pi. So when we've divided it in 6, each of them is a 12th as we move around this unit circle in 6, and we end up with 12 of those 6 to make 2 pi. When it's on fourths, that's the same. 2 pi is the same as 8 over 4 pi. So we're just dividing these segments up into fourths, and there are 8 of them in the circle. When it's by thirds, we're dividing the pi up 6. I don't mean pi, pi. I mean we're dividing this pi up into this circle up into thirds, and there are 6 total of those in 2 pi. That's a little confusing, but hopefully you can see this. This, like I said, is very important, and if you don't have this down, every piece of it builds on itself, and it'll become more and more confusing as you start moving to the next step, and we add the coordinates, and then ultimately we graph sine and cosine onto the XY axis using the unit circle. Okay.